Alright, back again for another deep dive. And this time, we're tackling a period that's just overflowing with military brilliance, ambition, and, well, maybe a bit of treachery too. We're talking about the Roman conquest of the Mediterranean. A fascinating period indeed, and one with so many different perspectives to consider. We've got battle accounts, political analyses, and even some personal stories that really bring the drama of the era to life. You know, our listeners are really into military history, and they're particularly interested in how these ancient conflicts shaped the course of European history, so we're going to try to focus on that as much as possible. So to set the stage, can you give us a quick overview of the Mediterranean world in the 3rd century BC? It sounds like it's a pretty volatile place. Oh, it absolutely was. Think of it as a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. You've got Rome, this rising power with a growing appetite for territory and influence. But they're surrounded by rivals, Carthage, the various Hellenistic kingdoms, all these ambitious leaders vying for control. It was a recipe for conflict, and conflict is exactly what they got. And we know from our last deep dive that those conflicts could get pretty brutal. Speaking of which, I wanted to pick up where we left off last time, with Hannibal's campaigns in Italy. His brother, Hasdrubal, also played a key role in the Second Punic War, didn't he? His North African campaign is one I'm really curious to unpack. It's a fascinating campaign full of strategic brilliance and unexpected alliances. Hasdrubal's task was essentially to cut off reinforcements to Hannibal in Italy, and to do that, he needed a strong cavalry force. He went for the Numidian cavalry, right? Those guys were legendary. You got it. They were known for their speed, their maneuverability, their ability to disrupt enemy formations and sow chaos on the battlefield. To secure their support, Hasdrubal sought out an alliance with a Numidian prince, a guy named Massinissa. Now, Massinissa had his own motivations for getting involved in this whole mess, and they revolved around a woman named Safa Nisba. Safa Nisba. Her story is one of those historical side notes such as Gradzoots, like there's something out of a Shakespearean tragedy. Totally. She was a Carthaginian noblewoman renowned for her beauty and her political influence. She was initially betrothed to Massinissa, but then for political reasons she was given to a rival Numidian chieftain, Syphax. This betrayal fueled Massinissa's desire for revenge and ultimately pushed him into the arms of Rome and Hasdrubal. So we'd get love, betrayal, political maneuvering, and a whole lot of military might swirling around in this story. What happened when Massinissa, now allied with Rome, finally got his chance to reclaim Sophonisba? It's a tragic tale, really. Hasdrubal, ever the pragmatist, saw Sophonisba as a potential liability. He feared her loyalty to Carthage might jeopardize his newly forged alliance with Massinissa, so he demanded her surrender to Rome. Wow, so Massinissa was caught between a rock and a hard place, his love for Sophonisba and his loyalty to Rome. Exactly, it was an impossible choice, and in a heartbreaking act he offered Sophonisba poison, allowing her to choose death over the humiliation of captivity and potential punishment in Rome. It's such a powerful story, isn't it? You can see why artists and writers have been drawn to it for centuries. Sophonisba becomes this symbol of the human cost of war, the sacrifices demanded, the impossible choices forced upon individuals caught in the crossfire of these grand conflicts. But her death also cemented Massinissa's alliance with Rome, an alliance that would have a huge impact on the course of the Second Punic War, especially in the upcoming Battle of Zama. Oh, absolutely. Zama in 22 BC was the decisive battle, the clash that would determine the fate of both Rome and Carthage. And it's a battle with so many layers and two military masterminds, Hannibal and Hasdrubal, brothers facing each other on the battlefield. It doesn't get much more dramatic than that. So you've got Hannibal, the strategic genius who had held Roman legions at bay for years, finally back on home turf. But he was facing some serious challenges, right? Our sources mentioned he was outnumbered and up against a Roman army that had learned from his tactics. It wasn't looking good for Hannibal. The Roman army he faced at Zama was different from the one he'd fought in Italy. They were more disciplined, better organized, and they had the Numidian cavalry, thanks to Hasdrubal's alliance with Massinissa. Talk about a twist of fate. The very tactics that Hannibal had used to such devastating effect against the Romans were now being turned against him. I'm on the edge of my seat here. How did the battle actually unfold? It was a brutal, bloody affair. Both sides fought with incredible ferocity. But Hasdrubal, as we know, was a master strategist. He held back the Numidian cavalry, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash them. Oh man, he was playing the long game. Yeah, it's almost like he was watching a replay of Cannae, Hannibal's greatest victory, but this time, he was in control. That's a great way to put it. The Numidian cavalry under Massiniss's command smashed into Hannibal's flanks, disrupting his formations, creating chaos. During the tide of the battle, it was a devastating blow. So Zizama was a decisive victory for Hasdrubal and by extension for Rome. What were the immediate consequences for Carthage? What did this defeat mean for their future? It was the end of the road for Carthage, at least as a major power. They were forced to surrender, and the peace treaty imposed by Rome was harsh. They lost their overseas territories, their navy, their ability to wage war without Roman consent. Essentially, Carthage was reduced to a shadow of its former self, a client state existing at Rome's mercy. You know, it's amazing how Rome managed to spin their conflict with the king of Macedon as a liberation campaign. It was a brilliant propaganda move, taking advantage of existing tensions and shaping the narrative to benefit them. They were masters of that, weren't they? Identify a power vacuum or some simmering resentment, position yourself as the defender, the underdog, and bam, you've got a justification for intervention. But wasn't the king of Macedon was just sitting around twiddling his thumbs, was he? He had his own ambitions. Oh, absolutely. He was no pushover. The guy was a shrewd and ambitious ruler looking to expand his own power. Attacking Pergamum and Rhodes, both Roman allies, was a calculated provocation. And then he attacks Athens. Maybe not the smartest strategic move, but it certainly got Rome's attention. It's like he was testing them, pushing their buttons to see how they'd react. Maybe he thought they were too busy consolidating their gains after the Punic Wars to bother with him. Big mistake. Huge miscalculation. He underestimated Roman resolve and their ability to fight on multiple fronts. His actions gave Rome the perfect excuse to intervene in the eastern Mediterranean, and intervene they did. The Second Macedonian War kicked off in 200 BC, and the Roman legions marched east. But what's interesting about this conflict is that it wasn't just a brute force invasion. The Roman commander, Titus Quintius Flamininus, took a more subtle approach. Flamininus was a brilliant strategist and a skilled diplomat. He knew that winning hearts and minds was just as important as winning battles. Instead of just crushing the opposition, he focused on turning the Greek city-states against the king of Macedon, isolating him and forging alliances that would benefit Rome in the long run. It was a smart move. Turn your enemies' allies against them, minimize your own casualties, and emerge as the savior of the Greeks. He understood the power of propaganda and used it masterfully. Exactly. He presented Rome as a benevolent liberator, the champion of Greek freedom, and it worked. The Greek city-states, tired of Macedonian rule, flocked to his banner, eager to throw off the yoke of oppression. This allowed Flamininus to isolate the king of Macedon and ultimately defeat him at the Battle of Seleucid in 197 BC. Seleucid was a decisive victory for Rome, a major turning point in their expansion into the eastern Mediterranean. It's clear that their ambitions extended far beyond the Italian peninsula, wouldn't you say? Absolutely. Seleucid solidified Rome's position as a major player in the eastern Mediterranean. They had defeated a powerful opponent, established a network of alliances, and, crucially, they did it all under the guise of liberating the Greeks. It's a masterclass in political maneuvering. But I'm curious, how did the Greeks feel about this newfound freedom? Did they genuinely feel liberated, or had they simply traded one overlord for another? That's the question, isn't it? While Flamininus presented Rome as a benevolent protector, the reality was, well, a bit more complicated. So the Greeks got a taste of Roman liberation, and it wasn't quite the paradise they were hoping for. Let's just say that Roman friendship came with certain expectations. While they granted the Greek city-states a degree of autonomy, they also maintained a strong military presence in the region. Roman garrisons were established, they meddled in local politics, and they made it very clear that while the Greeks might be free in name, they were still under Rome's thumb. Sounds like a classic bait and switch. Promise freedom and protection, then subtly assert your dominance once the dust settles. It's a tactic that's been used throughout history. Unfortunately, you're right. And as you might imagine, this Roman protection wasn't universally popular. Resentment started to build, especially among those who had initially welcomed the Romans as liberators. It seems like Roman expansion, while incredibly successful, inevitably led to resistance, creating this cycle of conquest and rebellion that would define their interactions with the wider world for centuries to come. But before we move on to the next chapter of Roman expansion, it's worth taking a moment to appreciate just how rapidly their power had grown. It really is remarkable. In just a few short decades, they transformed from a regional power in Italy to this dominant force controlling vast territories in both the western and eastern Mediterranean. It's a testament to their military prowess, their political skills, their ruthlessness, and their ability to adapt and exploit their enemies' weaknesses. Oh, and let's not forget their mastery of propaganda. They were experts at shaping the narrative, justifying their actions, and presenting themselves as the defenders of civilization. Absolutely. But this rapid expansion also brought new challenges, right? The larger their empire grew, the more difficult it became to manage. Keeping order, integrating those conquered populations, dealing with the constant threat of rebellion, it must have been a logistical nightmare. You're hitting on a crucial point. The seeds of Rome's eventual decline were sown in their very success. The Roman Republic, with its relatively simple institutions, wasn't really designed to manage such a massive and diverse empire. It's almost like their own success set the stage for their downfall. The pressures of maintaining such a vast empire, combined with internal divisions and external threats, would eventually prove to be too much for the Republic to bear. Indeed. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's get back to the rising tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean. Rome's newfound dominance had caught the eye of another ambitious power, the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucids, haven't we run into them before? Weren't they the ones who teamed up with the king of Macedon to try and carve up the Ptolemaic kingdom while Rome was busy fighting Hannibal? That's them. And their ruler, Antiochus III, was a man with grand ambitions. He saw the growing resentment among the Greeks as an opportunity to challenge Roman hegemony, expand his own power, and maybe even re-establish the Seleucid Empire as the dominant force in the Eastern Mediterranean. So we've got a clash of titans brewing. Rome, the rising superpower of the West, versus a Seleucid Empire, this long-established power in the East. It's a conflict with echoes of the Punic Wars. Two great powers with vastly different cultures, ideologies, and ambitions, locked in a struggle for supremacy. It's a conflict that will test Rome's strength, their diplomatic skills, and their adaptability. And it's a conflict that will have huge consequences, not just for the Mediterranean world, but for the course of Western civilization itself. I'm looked. But before we dive into the specifics, there's one more question that's been bugging me. Shoot. We talked a lot about how Rome used propaganda to justify their actions, portraying themselves as liberators and protectors. But do they actually believe their own hype? Did they genuinely think they were bringing peace and order to a chaotic world? Or was it all just a cynical ploy to mask their imperial ambitions? That's a great question, and it's one that historians are still debating. It's likely that there was a mix of genuine belief and calculated pragmatism at play. On the one hand, the Romans did have a strong sense of their own destiny. They believed they were spreading civilization, bringing order to the world. So, kind of a white man's burden mentality, centuries before Kipling coined the phrase. It's an interesting parallel, but we have to be careful about applying modern concepts to ancient history. The Roman world was vastly different from the 19th century European colonial context. You're right, of course. It's easy to fall into the trap of viewing history through a modern lens. No worries, it's a natural tendency. The key is to be aware of the historical context. So back to Roman motivations. Soon, they probably had some genuine belief in their civilizing mission. But there was also a healthy dose of pragmatism involved, right? Oh, absolutely. The Romans were masters of realpolitik. They understood that power, both military and economic, was essential for survival and prosperity. Their interventions, while often presented as benevolent acts, were always designed to further their own interests. It's a fascinating duality. A genuine belief in their own righteousness, coupled with this ruthless pursuit of power. It's a potent combination, and it helps explain their incredible success. But as we've seen, that success also brought new challenges, new enemies, and ultimately the seeds of their own decline. You got it. And as we delve deeper into the Roman-Seleucid conflict, we'll see how these tensions played out, how Rome's ambition continued to shape the course of history, and how the very foundations of the Republic started to crack under the weight of their own success. Okay, so we've got Rome and the Seleucid Empire on a collision course, and the Aetolian League, fed up with Roman protection, is backing Antiochus III. It's a recipe for a major showdown. It was a complicated situation, to say the least. Antiochus saw this as his opportunity to step in, to present himself as the champion of the Greeks, their liberator from Roman control. He landed in Greece in 192 BC, ready to take on the Romans. But it wasn't just about Greek freedom for Antiochus, was it? He had his own agenda. Of course. Antiochus was a savvy ruler. He saw a chance to weaken Rome, expand his own territory, and maybe even re-establish the Seleucid Empire as the top dog in the Eastern Mediterranean. So both Rome and Antiochus are vying for control, both claiming to be liberators, but ultimately pursuing their own interests. And then, to make things even more interesting, we have Hannibal advising Antiochus. What a twist. Hannibal's presence adds a whole other dimension to this conflict. The guy who almost brought Rome to its knees is now advising their enemy. Imagine that. And get this, our sources suggest that Hannibal was pushing for a direct land invasion of Italy. He thought that was the best way to take advantage of Roman weaknesses. Makes sense, given his track record. Did Antiochus take his advice? He didn't, and that might be one of the biggest what-if moments in military history. Instead of a land invasion, Antiochus decided to go head-to-head with Rome at sea. Why do you think he made that choice? Was he underestimating Roman naval power? Well, Rome had learned a lot from their early naval defeats against Carthage. They had invested heavily in their fleet and had become a formidable naval power. Plus, they had those key alliances with Rhodes and Pergamum, which gave them a significant advantage in terms of ships and experienced sailors. So it was a combination of Roman strength and smart alliances that put them in a good position from the get-go. Exactly. And to top it off, Antiochus made a major blunder. He divided his forces. He sent part of his fleet to the Aegean Sea while he focused on mainland Greece. That allowed the Romans to concentrate their forces and win decisive victories on both fronts. Never a good idea to split your forces when you're facing a stronger enemy. So the Seleucid fleet was crushed. Pretty much, it culminated in a decisive Roman victory at the Battle of Myonnesus in 190 BC. Antiochus had to sue for peace and accept some pretty humiliating terms in the Treaty of Apamea in 188 BC. Another defeated enemy, another treaty that favors Rome. It's a recurring theme. What did this treaty mean for the Seleucids? The Treaty of Apamea was a huge win for Rome. It cemented their control over the eastern Mediterranean. Antiochus had to give up a ton of territory, pay a massive war indemnity, and drastically reduce his army and navy. Basically, the Seleucid Empire became a client state of Rome, just like Carthage. So, by 188 BC, Rome had taken down three major powers: Carthage, the King of Macedon, and the Seleucid Empire. They were the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean. It's an incredible feat. They went from a relatively small power in Italy to the dominant force in the Mediterranean in just a few generations. It speaks volumes about their military strength, their political savvy, and their sheer ambition. But this rapid expansion also brought its own set of challenges. The bigger their empire got, the harder it became to manage. That's right. Integrating all these different cultures, maintaining order, dealing with constant threats, it put a huge strain on their system. It's like their very success set the stage for their eventual downfall. The Roman Republic, with its relatively simple structure, wasn't really equipped to handle such a vast and complex empire. You're right, the Roman Republic would eventually morph into an empire, but that transition was full of difficulties. Internal strife, social unrest, economic problems, and ongoing pressure from external enemies would eventually contribute to their decline and fall. But that's story for another time. We've covered a lot of ground today, from Hasdrubal's strategic brilliance to the tragic story of Sophonisba, from the epic clash at Zama to the rise and fall of empires. It's been fascinating. It really highlights the complex interplay of ambition, strategy, and just plain luck that shaped this pivotal period in history, and makes you think about the lasting impact of these ancient conflicts. The echoes of the Roman world are still felt today in our laws, our languages, our ideas about government and society. It's a reminder that the past is never truly past. We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this crucial period in history and the profound impact it had on Western civilization. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep delving into the mysteries of the past. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into history, so until then, happy exploring.